The first thing I noticed was the fog. It was drifting through the iron fence of my family cemetery at 4 in the afternoon on a Thursday, thick and chemical smelling, the kind that comes out of a machine rented from a party supply store. I stood at the edge of my property with my truck still running, the engine ticking in the October heat, and watched a plastic skeleton dangle from the branch of the live oak that shaded my grandmother's headstone. The skeleton had a witch's hat stapled to its skull. Below it, someone had arranged a ring of battery-operated tea lights around the base of the granite marker that read, Eleanor Vance, 1921 to 2014, beloved mother and teacher. The tea lights flickered orange in the fog. I turned off the engine. The silence that followed was worse than the noise, because in the silence, I could hear laughter coming from the trail that had been cut through the woods behind the cemetery, the trail that led to the subdivision's community park, the trail that was supposed to be a nature path for birdwatchers and joggers. Now it was a haunted trail, and my family's graves were the main attraction. I pulled out my phone and opened the neighborhood Facebook group. The first post was a photo album titled Halloween Trail Preview Night, Spooky Fun for the Whole Family. The cover photo showed a teenage volunteer in a zombie costume crouched behind my grandfather's headstone, making claw hands at the camera. The caption read, "The old cemetery is the perfect spot. So authentic." The post had 47 likes. The HOA president, a woman named Patricia Calloway, had commented with 3 pumpkin emojis and the words, "Wait until you see it at night." I did not comment. I did not post. I took a screenshot, put my phone in my pocket, and walked toward the cemetery gate. The gate was open. It was never open. I kept it closed with a simple latch, not a lock, because the cemetery was on my land, inside my fence line, and everyone in the neighborhood knew what it was. Or at least they used to know. The gate had been tied back with orange baling twine to keep it wide for the trail. A laminated sign had been zip-tied to the fence post. It read, "Haunted Cemetery, enter if you dare," in dripping red letters. Below that, in smaller print, sponsored by the Willow Creek HOA Halloween Committee. I stood there for a long time. The fog machine chugged somewhere behind the headstones. The plastic skeleton creaked in the breeze. The tea lights kept flickering. And I thought about my daughter Lily, who was 9 years old and who had visited this cemetery every Sunday since she was old enough to walk, who left wildflowers on Eleanor's grave because Eleanor had been her great-grandmother, who knew the names on every stone and could tell you which ancestor had been a school teacher, and which had fought in the First World War, and which had planted the live oak as a sapling in 1947. Lily had seen the photos online before I did. She had come into the kitchen that morning while I was making coffee, holding her tablet with both hands, her face pale and confused. "Dad," she had said, "why is there a zombie on Grandma Eleanor's grave?" That was how it started. That was the moment the folder opened in my mind. The folder I had not needed to open in years. The folder that contained every document related to the Vance family cemetery, including the one document that Patricia Calloway had never bothered to look up, the burial record. The active, recorded, county-maintained burial record that proved the cemetery was not abandoned, was not historic, was not community property, and was most certainly not a Halloween decoration. She had no idea what she had done, but she was about to find out. Before I explain what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. I want to know who else understands what it means to protect a piece of family ground. My name is Daniel Vance. I am 42 years old, a civil engineer by trade, and I have lived on this property for 16 years. The land belonged to my mother's family for 4 generations before that. The cemetery was established in 1903, when my great-great-grandfather, Samuel Vance, buried his wife Margaret under the live oak that was already old then. Over the decades, 17 members of my family were laid to rest inside that iron fence. The last was my grandmother, Eleanor, 10 years ago. The cemetery is small, maybe 40 feet by 40 feet, tucked into the northeast corner of my 5-acre parcel, where the property line meets the wooded buffer between my land and the Willow Creek subdivision. When the subdivision was built in the early 2000s, the developer tried to buy the buffer land from my mother. She refused. She told them the cemetery was not negotiable. The developer grumbled but built the subdivision anyway, and the HOA was formed, and for years there was an uneasy peace. The nature trail was built on HOA land, not mine. It curved through the woods and ended at a small pond about 200 yards from my fence line. That was fine. That was their land. But the cemetery was mine. It had always been mine. and Patricia Calloway had decided it looked perfectly spooky. I did not know Patricia well. I had seen her at a few neighborhood meetings, always in a crisp blazer, always holding a clipboard, always speaking in the kind of polished, condescending tone that made people nod along even when she was wrong. She had been HOA president for 3 years. She drove a white Mercedes SUV. She had a committee for everything: the landscaping committee, the social committee, the architectural review committee, the Halloween committee. She treated the HOA like a small government and herself like its executive. And apparently she had decided that my family cemetery was an abandoned historic feature that could be used for community events. I walked back to my truck and sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes, letting the air conditioning cool my face. I thought about calling the sheriff immediately. I thought about walking onto the trail and tearing down every decoration with my bare hands. But I am an engineer. I think in systems. I think in documentation. I think in the long game. So instead of reacting, I drove home, sat down at my desk, and opened the fireproof safe where I keep all the property records. The folder was exactly where I had left it. It was a thick manila folder, the kind with a reinforced tab, labeled Vance Cemetery, Legal. Inside were the documents that my mother had given me when she signed the property over, the documents her father had given her, the documents that stretched back to 1903, the original deed, the plat map showing the cemetery parcel, the survey from 1987, the maintenance agreement recorded with the county, and the burial record. The burial record was the key. It was a document filed with the County Vital Records Office, updated every time a family member was interred. It listed every grave, every name, every date, every plot location. It was a legal record of an active, private family cemetery. It had been updated as recently as 2014, when Eleanor was buried. It proved, beyond any possible argument, that the cemetery was not abandoned. An abandoned cemetery is one thing. An active family burial ground is something else entirely. And using an active burial ground as a Halloween attraction was not just disrespectful, it was illegal. I closed the folder and set it on my desk. Then I picked up my phone and called the County Vital Records office. The clerk who answered was a woman named Mrs. Harlow. I had spoken to her once before, years ago, when I updated the record after my grandmother's funeral. She remembered me. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice warm and papery, like old documents. "How can I help you?" "Mrs. Harlow," I said, "I need to confirm that the Vance family cemetery burial record is current and active." "Of course," she said. I heard the click of a keyboard. "Yes, it's right here. Last updated November 2014. 17 interments. Status: active private family cemetery. Access and maintenance rights reserved to the Vance family and their descendants. Is there a problem?" "There might be," I said. "Can you email me a certified copy?" "I can have it ready this afternoon," she said. "Would you like to come pick it up?" "I'll be there in an hour," I said. The county records office was a low brick building on the edge of town, the kind of place that smelled like old paper and floor wax. Mrs. Harlow was a small woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain and the patient, meticulous manner of someone who had spent decades organizing other people's lives. She handed me a sealed envelope with the certified copy inside. "Is everything all right, Mr. Vance?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "But it will be." That evening, I drove back to the cemetery. The fog machine was still running. The tea lights had fresh batteries. Someone had added a fake tombstone made of styrofoam, painted gray, with the words RIP carved into it. It was leaning against the real headstone of my great-uncle Henry. I took photos of everything: the fake tombstone, the plastic skeleton, the fog machine, the laminated sign, the orange twine on the gate, the tea lights on Eleanor's grave, the trail markers that had been spray-painted on the trees, leading from the subdivision to my fence line. I photographed it all from multiple angles, making sure the GPS coordinates were embedded in the metadata. Then I went home and wrote an email to the HOA board. The email was polite. It was professional. It was the kind of email that a calm, reasonable person writes when they want to give someone a chance to fix a mistake before it becomes a legal problem. I wrote that the cemetery was private property, that it was an active family burial ground, that the decorations and trail access were unauthorized, and that I expected everything to be removed within 24 hours. I attached 3 photos. I sent the email at 7:14 p.m. Patricia Calloway replied at 7:32 p.m. Her email was not polite. It was not professional. It was the kind of email that someone writes when they have never been told no by anyone who mattered. "Mr. Vance," she wrote, "the Halloween committee has reviewed this matter. The cemetery is located in the wooded buffer zone that has been maintained by the HOA for over a decade. It appears to be an abandoned historic feature with no active ownership claim. The trail has been planned for months and approved by the board. The decorations will remain through November 1st as scheduled. If you have concerns, you may address them at the next board meeting on November 15th. Regards, Patricia Calloway, President, Willow Creek HOA." I read the email 3 times. Each time, I noticed something new. Abandoned historic feature. No active ownership claim. Maintained by the HOA. She had not checked. She had not looked up the property records. She had not called the county. She had simply decided that the cemetery was abandoned because it was old and because it was convenient for her Halloween plans. And then she had put that decision in writing. People like Patricia Calloway mistake silence for weakness. They mistake politeness for submission. They mistake a carefully worded email for a request that can be denied. She had no idea that she had just handed me the first piece of evidence in a folder that was about to get very, very thick. I did not reply to her email. Instead, I called my attorney. His name was Robert Chen. He was a property lawyer in his 50s, a man who spoke in short, precise sentences, and who had once told me that the best legal strategy was to let the other side keep talking until they talked themselves into a corner. I explained the situation. I read him Patricia's email. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "She called it an abandoned historic feature." Yes. In writing. Yes. And she attached the HOA's name to it. Yes. Another silence. Then, "Daniel, I'm going to need you to send me everything you have. The deed, the survey, the burial record, the photos, the email chain, everything." "I'll send it tonight," I said. "And Robert?" "Yes? The Halloween Trail preview night is Saturday. That's 3 days from now. She's planning to have residents, parents, volunteers, and who knows who else walking through my cemetery." "Let her plan," Robert said. "By Saturday, she's going to wish she hadn't." The next morning, I drove Lily to school. She was quiet in the back seat, her tablet face down on the seat beside her. She had not looked at the Facebook group again. She had not asked any more questions. But I could see the confusion still sitting behind her eyes, the way a child looks when they are trying to understand why adults do things that make no sense. "Dad," she said as we pulled into the drop-off line, "are they going to take the decorations down?" "Yes," I said. "When? Soon? Before Halloween?" "Before the preview night," I said. She nodded, but she did not look convinced. I watched her walk into the school building, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, and I made a promise to myself. By the time Saturday arrived, Patricia Calloway was going to understand exactly whose cemetery she had decorated. That afternoon, I drove to the county surveyor's office. I had ordered a new survey of my property 6 months earlier for an unrelated reason. I was planning to build a workshop near the house, and the surveyor had flagged the cemetery parcel with precise GPS coordinates. I picked up a certified copy of the survey and added it to the folder. Then I drove to the county tax assessor's office and pulled the tax records for my parcel. The cemetery was clearly marked as part of my property, with no separate tax designation, no abandonment filing, no transfer to the HOA or the subdivision. It was mine. It had always been mine. The paper trail was so clear that a child could follow it. But Patricia Calloway had not followed it. She had not even tried. On Friday, the day before the preview night, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney. It was a cease and desist letter, but not the kind you might expect. It was addressed to me, and it demanded that I cease and desist from interfering with the HOA's scheduled community events, and that I refrain from contacting board members directly regarding matters already decided by the board. It threatened legal action if I continued to harass the Halloween committee. I read the letter twice. Then I scanned it and sent it to Robert. He called me back within 10 minutes. "They just threatened to sue you for objecting to their trespassing," he said. "That's a new one. What do I do?" I asked. "Nothing," Robert said. "Let them have their preview night. Let them bring everyone. Let Patricia stand in front of a crowd and explain why she turned a family cemetery into a haunted house. And then, when she's done explaining, you're going to hand her something she can't explain away." "The burial record." "The burial record," Robert confirmed. "And the deed, and the survey, and the tax records, and her email, and the cease and desist letter. All of it." I hung up the phone and looked at the folder on my desk. It was thicker now. It had weight. It had the kind of weight that Patricia Calloway's clipboard could not match. Saturday arrived. The preview night was scheduled for 6 p.m. The Facebook group had been buzzing all day with posts about the trail, the decorations, the spooky old cemetery, the costumes, the candy stations. Patricia had posted a video of herself standing in front of the cemetery gate, wearing an orange blazer and holding a pumpkin-shaped sign that read, "Willow Creek Haunted Trail, tonight." She was smiling the smile of someone who believed she had won. At 5 p.m., I put the folder in my truck. At 5:15, I picked up Lily from her friend's house. She was wearing a costume, a witch's dress and a pointed hat, because she had been invited to the preview night by her friend's parents before any of this started. She looked at me with worried eyes. "Dad, are we going to the trail?" "We're going to the cemetery," I said, "but not for the trail." At 5:30, I called the county sheriff's non-emergency line. I explained that there was a large gathering planned on private property, that the property owner had not given permission, and that I was concerned about trespassing and potential damage to a protected family burial ground. The dispatcher said she would send a deputy. At 5:45, I parked my truck on the shoulder of the road near the trail entrance. The subdivision was already crowded. Cars lined the streets. Families in costumes were walking toward the woods. I could see the glow of the tea lights through the trees. I could smell the fog machine. I could hear the recorded sound effects. Creaking doors, howling wolves, witch cackles, playing from a speaker somewhere on the trail. Lily held my hand. "Dad, I'm scared." "Not of the trail," I said. "Of the people." "You don't need to be scared," I said. "You just need to watch." We walked toward the cemetery. The trail was lined with jack-o'-lanterns and fake spider webs. Volunteers in costumes jumped out from behind trees, shrieking at the children, who shrieked back and laughed. Parents took photos. The whole scene was loud and bright and festive, and at the center of it all, like the final exhibit in a museum of bad decisions, was my family cemetery. The fog was thicker now. The plastic skeleton had been joined by 3 more. The fake tombstones had multiplied. Someone had draped a string of purple lights across the iron fence. And standing at the gate, clipboard in hand, orange blazer glowing in the twilight, was Patricia Calloway. She was talking to a group of parents and volunteers, gesturing toward the headstones, her voice carrying over the noise of the crowd. "And this is the historic cemetery," she was saying. "It dates back to the early 1900s. Completely abandoned now, of course. No one even knows who's buried here anymore. It's just been sitting here for decades, so we thought, why not give it some life?" She laughed at her own joke. The parents laughed with her. The volunteers nodded. And then Patricia saw me. Her smile flickered for just a moment, the way a fluorescent light flickers before it goes out. Then it came back, brighter and harder. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "I didn't expect to see you here. I thought we had an understanding." "We don't have an understanding," I said. My voice was calm. I had practiced calm. I had been calm for 3 days. "We have a disagreement, and I'm here to resolve it." Patricia's smile tightened. "This is not the time or place. We have a community event in progress. If you'd like to discuss this, you can come to the board meeting in November." "No," I said. "We're going to discuss it now." I raised my voice just enough to carry. Not a shout. Just enough volume that the parents nearby stopped talking and turned to look. "Patricia, you are standing on private property. This cemetery is not abandoned. It is not historic in the way you're claiming. It is an active family burial ground, and you have turned it into a Halloween attraction without permission." Patricia's face went through several expressions in quick succession. Surprise, irritation, then a kind of polished condescension that she had probably practiced in front of a mirror. "Mr. Vance," she said, "I understand that you have some sentimental attachment to this area, but the board has reviewed the situation. This cemetery has been abandoned for years. There are no active ownership records. It falls within the buffer zone that the HOA maintains. We have every right to use it for community events." "Show me the records," I said. "Excuse me? Show me the records that say this cemetery is abandoned. Show me the records that say the HOA maintains it. Show me the records that give you the right to decorate my grandmother's grave with tea lights and plastic skeletons." Patricia's mouth opened and closed. The clipboard in her hand suddenly looked very light, very empty, very useless. "I don't have them with me," she said. "But the board didn't check," I said. "You didn't check. You saw an old fence and some headstones, and you decided it would look good on the trail. You didn't call the county. You didn't look up the property records. You didn't even knock on my door. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the folder. It was thick and heavy, and the tab read, Vance Cemetery, Legal, in my mother's handwriting. I held it up so everyone could see it. I have the records, I said. I have the deed from 1903. I have the survey showing the cemetery inside my property line. I have the tax records. I have the maintenance agreement. And I have the burial record. I opened the folder and pulled out the certified copy of the burial record. The county seal was visible at the top. The paper was crisp and official. This is the Vance family cemetery burial record, I said, loud enough that the whole crowd could hear. It is filed with the County Vital Records Office. It lists every person buried in this cemetery. 17 people. The first was Margaret Vance in 1903. The last was Eleanor Vance in 2014. My grandmother, I pointed at Eleanor's headstone. The tea lights were still flickering around its base. The plastic skeleton was still dangling from the oak branch above it. That is her grave, I said. And you put a fog machine on it. The silence that followed was the loudest silence I have ever heard. The parents stopped taking photos. The volunteers stopped jumping out from behind trees. The recorded sound effects kept playing. A wolf howl, a witch cackle, but they sounded hollow now, like a joke that had gone on too long. Patricia's face had gone pale. Her clipboard was hanging at her side. She looked at the burial record in my hand, and I could see her mind working, trying to find a way out, trying to find an argument that would make this not her fault. I didn't know, she said finally. How could I have known? You could have asked, I said. You could have checked. You could have done literally anything except assume. At that moment, the deputy arrived. He was a young man with a crew cut and a careful, procedural manner. He walked up to the edge of the crowd and took in the scene. The fog, the skeletons, the headstones, the angry homeowner holding a folder, the HOA president looking like she had just swallowed a lemon. Who called the sheriff's office? He asked. I did, I said. This is my property. These people are trespassing. And that woman, I pointed at Patricia, has been running a Halloween event on an active family burial ground without permission. The deputy looked at Patricia. Is that true? Patricia straightened her blazer. She was trying to recover, trying to find the authority that had carried her through every board meeting and committee vote. Deputy, she said, this is a misunderstanding. The HOA believed this cemetery was abandoned. We were using it for a community event. There's no harm done. No harm, I said. I walked over to Eleanor's headstone and picked up one of the tea lights. The plastic was warm from the battery. You put decorations on my grandmother's grave. You let teenagers pose for photos on my grandfather's headstone. You tied the gate open with twine. You spray-painted trail markers on my trees. And you're telling me there's no harm? I handed the deputy the burial record. He read it carefully, his eyes moving down the page. When he looked up, his expression had changed. It was not angry. It was the expression of someone who had just realized he was standing in the middle of a legal problem that was way above his pay grade. Ma'am, he said to Patricia, this document says this is an active family burial ground. That means it's protected under state law. You can't just use it for a Halloween trail. But we didn't know, Patricia said again. Her voice was higher now, thinner. That's not a defense, the deputy said. I'm going to have to ask you to shut this down. The trail can't go through here. The decorations need to be removed, and you're going to need to work this out with the property owner. Patricia stared at him. Then she stared at me. Then she stared at the crowd of parents and volunteers who were watching her, with expressions that ranged from confusion to disgust. This is ridiculous, she said. This is a community event. The board approved it. I have the authority. You have no authority here, I said. You never did. You just had a clipboard and a lot of confidence. I turned to the deputy. I want the decorations removed tonight. All of them. The fog machine, the skeletons, the fake tombstones, the lights, the signs. Everything. And I want the trail rerouted so it doesn't come within 100 feet of my fence line. The deputy nodded. That's reasonable. And I want a public apology, I said, from the HOA. Posted in the Facebook group and sent to every resident who attended this event. Patricia's face twisted. I am not going to. You will, I said, or I will file a formal complaint with the county for desecration of a burial ground. And I will sue the HOA for trespassing, property damage, and emotional distress. And I will win, because I have the records, and you have nothing. The deputy looked at Patricia. Ma'am, I'd recommend you cooperate. Patricia stood there for a long moment. The fog machine chugged. The plastic skeleton creaked. The tea lights flickered. And then, slowly, like a balloon deflating, she nodded. Fine, she said. We'll take it down. Now, I said. Not later. Now. The next hour was chaos. Volunteers in zombie costumes carried fog machines back to the trailhead. Parents helped their children take down the fake tombstones. Someone unplugged the speaker, and the recorded sound effects finally stopped. The purple lights came down. The laminated sign was removed from the fence. The orange twine was cut. And through it all, Patricia Calloway stood at the edge of the scene, her orange blazer looking less like a statement and more like a warning sign, her clipboard hanging uselessly at her side. She did not help with the cleanup. She did not apologize to me. She just watched, her face a mask of controlled fury, as her perfect Halloween event collapsed around her. By 8 p.m., the cemetery was quiet again. The fog had dissipated. The tea lights were gone. The plastic skeletons had been stuffed into trash bags and carried away. The gate was closed. I stood inside the fence with Lily, who had taken off her witch hat and was holding my hand. Are they gone? She asked. They're gone, I said. Is Grandma Eleanor okay? I looked at Eleanor's headstone. The granite was smudged with dirt from the tea lights, but it was intact. The live oak was still standing. The iron fence was still straight. She's okay, I said. She's always been okay. She just needed someone to remember that she's still here. Lily knelt down and brushed the dirt off the headstone with her hand. Then she picked a wildflower from the edge of the fence and laid it on the grave, the way she did every Sunday. I'm sorry, Grandma Eleanor, she whispered. Some people forgot you were here. I stood there in the quiet, listening to the wind move through the live oak, and I thought about what Patricia had said. No one even knows who's buried here anymore. She was wrong. I knew. Lily knew. The county records knew. And now, everyone in the Willow Creek subdivision knew too. The next morning, the public apology appeared in the Facebook group. It was posted by the HOA's official account, but I could tell it had been written by someone else. Probably the board secretary. A woman named Margaret Chen who had always seemed reasonable. The apology was short and direct. It acknowledged that the cemetery was private property, that the HOA had failed to verify its status, that the Halloween trail had been routed without permission, and that the decorations had been removed. It apologized to the Vance family and promised that the trail would be permanently rerouted. Patricia Calloway did not comment on the post. She did not like it. She did not react with any emojis. But the comments from residents told me everything I needed to know. Wait, that cemetery is an active burial ground? And she just decorated it without asking? My kids were posing on someone's grave. I feel sick. Patricia told us it was abandoned. She said she checked. She didn't check. She never checks. This is why people hate HOAs. The post stayed up for 3 days. By Tuesday, the board had called an emergency meeting. I was not invited, but I heard about it from my neighbor, an elderly man named Frank Delgado, who had lived in the subdivision since it was built, and who had known my mother. They voted to remove Patricia from the Halloween committee, Frank told me over the fence the next morning, and from the social committee, and from the architectural review committee. Not from the board? I asked. Not yet, Frank said. But there's talk. People are angry. She made the whole HOA look bad, and she did it in front of a deputy. I nodded. That was enough for now. The following weekend, I drove to the county vital records office and picked up a second certified copy of the burial record. I put it in a weatherproof sleeve and attached it to the inside of the cemetery gate, where anyone who approached could see it. Below it, I added a small sign. It read, Vance Family Cemetery, established 1903. Active burial ground. Private property. Please respect the resting place of our family. The sign was not angry. It was not confrontational. It was just the truth, written clearly, for anyone who bothered to read. A few weeks later, the HOA sent me a formal letter. It was signed by the entire board, including Patricia, though I suspected her signature had been required rather than volunteered. The letter apologized again. It confirmed that the trail had been permanently rerouted. It offered to pay for a professional cleaning of the headstones, and it included a check for $500 to cover any inconvenience or distress caused by the Halloween event. I cashed the check. I used the money to plant a new rosebush beside Eleanor's grave. The rosebush bloomed the following spring. It was a pale pink, the color of the wildflowers Lily used to pick. And every Sunday, when Lily and I walked to the cemetery to leave fresh flowers and brush the dirt off the headstones, the roses were there, quiet and steady, growing in the soil that had belonged to my family for over a century. Patricia Calloway still lives in the subdivision. I see her sometimes, driving her white Mercedes SUV, her clipboard still on the passenger seat. She does not wave. She does not make eye contact. She looks straight ahead, her face tight, her jaw set. She is still on the board, but her power is diminished. The other board members no longer defer to her. The committees no longer report to her. She is a president in name only, and everyone knows it. The Halloween trail still happens every year. It is still popular. It still draws crowds. But it no longer comes within 100 feet of my fence line. The trail markers have been repainted. The fog machines have been repositioned. The plastic skeletons now dangle from trees that are firmly on HOA property. And the cemetery remains what it has always been. A quiet place, a family place, a place where the dead are remembered, and the living are reminded that some things are more important than community events. Some people think authority comes from being loud, from having a clipboard, from driving a white SUV and wearing a blazer, and speaking in the kind of polished, condescending tone that makes people nod along even when you are wrong. But real authority is quieter than that. Real authority is a deed in a fireproof safe, a burial record in a county office, a survey with GPS coordinates, a folder full of documents that have been collected patiently, carefully, over years. Real authority does not need to shout, it just needs to be right. And when the moment comes, when the clipboard is raised and the fog machine is running and the plastic skeletons are dangling, real authority opens the folder and lets the paper do the talking. Paper remembers what people try to forget, and paper does not need a Halloween committee to make itself heard. I closed the folder and put it back in the safe. The cemetery was quiet. The live oak was still. The roses were blooming. And somewhere in the subdivision, a white Mercedes SUV drove past my fence line without stopping. That was enough. That was always going to be enough.